Thanks. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Tom. I was wondering, as more and more people seem to take your advice and use sort of a passive approach and stop picking winners and losers, does there ever become a tipping point in the future where it sort of becomes the 1950s again, and since no one is paying attention at all, it actually becomes possible to pick winners and losers?
Yeah, there is a point at which it becomes, once again, a terrific opportunity. It's that time when people say, I'm not going to be an investment manager. There's no point in it. The pay has gone down so badly. You can get much better jobs doing something else. It's going to come at a time when the securities firms don't have analysts that are pumping out tremendous amount of factual information. When Mike Bloomberg says, we're going to pull back all those machines because nobody's subscribing anymore, we're going to junk them. There is a point. But walk through the mathematics. Typical index fund will have turnover of about 5%. The market as a whole has turnover of about 100%, 120%, somewhere in that range. So if you move 50% of the assets into indexing, what fraction of the market will that be? It's about 3%. If you move 80% into indexing, what fraction of the total market activity? You're starting to get close. When you get to 95% of the money is now indexed, the amount of opportunity off indexing would be high, but by then, all those sad things I was talking about earlier, people saying, this business is over, I can't get a job, I can't get any equipment, I can't get any services, the hell with it. Then we'll be back with grass growing through the streets of New York, and we'll have all kinds of opportunities for people to get into active investment management, but they'll be alone. And they won't be able to get the services and help, and so it won't work for them anyway. I mean, this is one of those marvelous, mythical questions that I love you're asking it because it's a setup in the reality. The math, it just doesn't work. That there will come a time there's so much index that somebody ought to be really out there doing active investing.
And where
Besides, indexing has grown. I mean, it is getting close to 25% of individual money, and probably close to a third of institutional money is indexed. And when it gets to be 95%, I'm going to worry about that question, but I'm with Charley. I don't think that's... it's a good theoretical question, but I don't think it's ever going to happen.
You know that old poem, breathes there a man with soul so dead, who never to himself has said, this is mine own, my native land? Well, it's the same thing with active investing. We all believe we can do better. We all know from all the other experiences that we have in our lives that you can do better. It just happens in this particular one, if you're trying to do better, you're up against an invisible competition that is so damn good that it doesn't make sense to be doing it. And I'm back to George Plimpton going out and playing in the NFL. Nice guy, reasonably strong, reasonably healthy, he was 6 foot tall, but you could get killed out there in the line playing against a guy who weighs 300 pounds and does the 10-yard dash. Who wants to do that? Same problem.
Yeah. We have a bunch of questions in. It's a great question. We have a bunch of questions in from remote viewers, so you can see them ranked by popularity, so I'll just read a couple of these. The first one's actually a great one. It says, bonds are scary because interest rates are low, and stocks are scary because the economy has high unemployment, and profits are at an all-time high due to a lot of cost cutting. Peter asks, what should he do with his cash?
Well, I think bonds are scary because I think when you look at our dysfunctional government and when you look at how hard it is for us to rein in our budget deficit and do something about our long-run budget deficit, you realize that we've got a very high debt to GDP ratio, and the government's got to do something about it. Well, what the government is doing is something that goes under the name financial repression. We are keeping interest rates very, very low. The last time the 10-year Treasury yielded about 2.5%, which it yields now, it's actually up to 2.7 right now, but it's somewhere around that, was in 1946. In 1946, we had a debt to GDP ratio of 133%, much higher than it is now. And we were trying to finance that deficit and keeping interest rates very low. Well, we actually had interest rates pegged into the 1950s, and then we let them rise very, very gradually until 1980. And what happened in 1980, we had a moderate inflation. It was a little bigger, and there was an oil and food shock in the 70s, but in general it was a moderate inflation. And the debt to GDP ratio of the United States in 1980 was 30%. So what this financial repression does is it's a way of getting rid of your debt, of letting inflation inflate it away, and you do it on the backs of the bondholders. And I am very worried about that. And we at Wealthfront have I think some very interesting strategies in our asset allocation. For one thing, we use for part of what might be the safer bond portfolio, which is still needed for people, particularly those who worry about volatility, is we use an equity substitution strategy. And by that I mean we try to use very safe, high dividend growth stocks to substitute for the bond portfolio. Just to give you an example, AT&T stock yields something over 5%, and the dividend on AT&T has been growing at 5% a year. My guess is it won't grow at quite that rate in the future, but it's likely to grow. AT&T 10-year bonds yield 4%. Now, I can't believe that you won't be better off as an investor with AT&T stock. I think you'll get a higher rate of return. And there was a time when bond prices and yields were adjusting in the 1970s when bonds were more volatile than stocks. So that's some part of it. Another part of it is to look at some foreign countries with budget deficits under control and with debt to GDP ratios low that have higher yields. So we're very conscious of that and have adjusted the asset allocation to take advantage of that. Stocks are scary. They're always scary. Profits are at an all-time high. On the other hand, because we have high unemployment, I don't think is a reason to be negative on stocks. It means we've got a lot of excess capacity, and we could, in fact, grow as a nation at a much faster rate in the future. In fact, my own economic forecast is we've been growing at 2% a year. I think we're very likely to see in 2014 a growth rate that's over 3%. So I think that's actually an argument for stocks, because I think you're going to see more growth in the future than you have in the past. And in general, our portfolios, particularly for young people, are very much equity oriented, and we've been very careful about the bonds with some of the ideas that I gave you earlier.
Can I add on to that?
Sure.
It's really worth thinking about. Being young is the best competitive advantage you could possibly have as an investor, because you've got time. The big problem is you haven't been around long enough to realize what a terrific thing it is to be young. Okay.
It's wasted on the young?
You can you can read Bert's book and that'll catch you up, but it's a huge advantage to have time on your side. And most of the people here are going to be investing and buying securities and buying houses and buying art and investing and accumulating for the next 30, 40 years. Most of you work to 75. You'll enjoy the work so much you won't want to stop. And we'll move retirement ages out. So 75 is a reasonable bet. Most of you are under 40. So you got a long shot. Even when you retire, you're going to live for another 20 or 25 years after that. So your average length of time between now and when you sell them to pay for your way of living is not 35 years, it's 45 years. Nobody who's got 45 years would say, ooh, let's buy bonds, unless they're anxious about ups and downs in the market. If you just keep your vision on the long distance and don't worry about the ups and downs in the market, that's a calm under pressure. It's a tremendous advantage. Let me try one more dimension of this. Everybody in this room has got a job. Everybody in all the other rooms that are tied in has got a job. With a damn good company. Interesting place to work. Probably all are super smart and know that they could easily walk across the street and get a terrific job at another really interesting company anytime they wanted to. So security with regard to earned income is very, very high. The only thing you don't know is how rapidly you will rise in that earned income. You know, 5 years from now, it's not going to be less than it is now, unless you happen to shoot the lights out with some spectacular bonus, and that's a once in a lifetime. Leave that aside. Salary and regular bonuses, whatever, compensation, it's going to go clunkety, 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 clunk. That's essentially an income that is fixed on a slope, but it's fixed. Think of that as being a bond equivalent. 5% is a reasonable interest rate. Okay, multiply your salary by 20. That's how much you've got in fixed income right now. That is such a big fraction of your total wealth compared to what you've got in securities investment. Look at the whole picture. And I believe you will say, I want to reconsider how much I have in stocks versus bonds, because now that I realize I've got a fixed income that is huge, I'm way behind on what I ought to do in the stock area. I think most people who are in their 30s and 40s should be thinking seriously how much emotional stability they've got up to that level that they can live with. They should be piling everything they've got into equity type investing rather than into fixed income investing, because they're stuck with their biggest thing they've got. Their biggest value is their intellectual property. The ability to come into an outfit like Google and say, I'm here and I'm willing to work with you. What a fabulous sentence that is to be able to say out loud. No, recognize the reality. Your intellectual property value is very large.
People in general underestimate the value of that human capital asset. You know, a lot of the people in the room, technology industry, we spend so much time keeping our skills up to date. We learn the new languages, we learn the new platforms, we learn new solutions to old problems, but that doesn't always factor into how people think about money. I want to be careful because we have a couple more questions on time. There's one that I see highlighted in blue. I'm assuming that means I'm supposed to read it, so I assume blue is good. We talked about this briefly, but for folks in the audience who may have a lump sum or have been out of the market in some way, what are your opinions about lump sum investing versus dollar cost averaging?
I think it's a great idea to put everything you've got on the number that's going to work out really, really well. When you're gambling, that's exactly what you should do. And in investing, if you just have the ability to time the market, you should definitely do it. If, on the other hand, you're like all those boring people that Burton and I know, real human beings who could easily be misled and would rather settle for normal, break it up into parts and spread it out over some time. Don't try to be too cute and clever. All you do is hurt yourself. If, for God's sake, you're right, you'll then think, hey, you know, Bert, I'm really good at this. I think I'll do it again. And you'll get hit that time. Worse than that, you're right the second time. Now you're really in trouble because you'll honestly, God, believe you could do it. And we'll get you.
You don't get good at coin flipping? That doesn't happen? No? Bert, do you have anything to add? Or?
No, I think that says it very well. And as I suggested to you, there's a little example that I give of a market that's very volatile over 5 periods and ends up exactly where it is, but goes down first, and another market that goes up consistently, and you're actually better off with the market that was very volatile and can make even more money. So, and it's much less risky.
Yeah, the great thing about dollar cost averaging is that that you get in the habit of putting money in, that first time that you realize that the volatility actually works for you, right? That you ended up putting in money last month and now the market, that good feel, you realize it's actually a very boring process. You put in money continuously, let the markets do their thing.